Here on KGRA Radio, welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Greetings. I'm back with Chris Bledsoe. We had a riveting hour-long conversation. The last time, Chris talked about his fascinating experience known as the River Experience or the River Incident near Fayetteville, North Carolina, back in 2007 with his son, Chris Bledsoe Jr., and three other gentlemen while they were out fishing, and they had a remarkable experience. But this is not all to the Chris Bledsoe story. So, Chris, it's great to have you back. Welcome.
Thank you, Richard. I'm glad to be back. So,
I'm glad you're here. I'm wondering, there's a lot more with your story. There's owls, there's burning trees, there's mystical ladies that show up who look almost like the Virgin Mary in those, portrayals. And again, it's this thing where skeptics who don't know anything about you are very likely to say, this is too fantastic to be true. This guy's crazy, or he's lying, or whatever. But what I have found in looking into your case is what everyone else has found in looking into your case, which is that there's no evidence that any of this has been make-believe. And in fact, when people go and investigate you personally, which many have done, they come back absolutely convinced that this is for real. And topping it off, they themselves have had similar experiences. So this is what we're dealing with. So skeptics, be forewarned. If you really want to go investigate Chris Bledsoe, I imagine as long as you're a decent human being about it, he just might be nice enough to have you over, and you can go check it out for yourself and be surprised.
absolutely. They
Right.
can be skeptic, but I have evidence and witnesses, and that kind of
Yeah.
does that in, right? So,
So let's walk our way through back to 2007, if we may. You had this amazing encounter, and there was a big aftermath to it. I mean, this was the encounter that really put you on the map, so to speak, with the UFO world, right? I mean, no one, I don't think, really knew who you were before that, at least in that community. And you didn't contact MUFON until a little bit later in the year. So can we just kind of walk through what happened in the aftermath of this experience at the river?
yes, sir. So, let's move forward from that night on the river.
Mm-hmm.
I came home. My wife wasn't home, right? For a couple of days, she was out of town. But when she got home, um, I haven't told much of anyone until she came home, and that's when I started telling her.
Mm-hmm.
And I started telling my father and my mother, and just I thought the whole world wanted to know. Well, it didn't take me long to realize that um, in the South, in the Bible Belt, I was talking something demonic in their eyes, right?
Right.
For most, so immediately, I thought I don't have this disease anymore. I feel better. I'm not taking medication, and you won't believe what I saw. And I had this. I told Mufon when they came, I thought they were angels. That's what I told them,
Uh
because why would they come when I was in need and now I don't feel sick anymore? And so that didn't sit too well. Nobody could understand it. And my children were so young. My daughter was just 9 years old, a baby, and three boys. Junior was the oldest at 17. I have Ryan and Jeremy. They're 13 and 14 years old.
huh.
And
Mm-hmm.
and my family is very deep. My wife and her family are very deep into the Pentecostal Holiness Church, which are very strict. They don't cut their hair. Of course, my wife does, but her family, her mother, she was raised that strict. You don't buy on Sunday. I mean, so
Yes.
imagine here I come and I'm telling these people what happened, and it was like instant rejection. So for the next 12 months, I was basically, I felt completely ostracized by my church. I felt ostracized by the whole community. My dad, my mother thought that I had totally lost it. Maybe I was drinking and I'm like, Dad, I can't drink alcohol with Crohn's disease. It would, that just don't work. So I was, for the next 12 months, it drove me into depression. I basically lived in my study. I slept on the couch. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything, and I didn't. All I could do is stare out the window and wish they would come back, and wish that they would help me, and wish that they would expose themselves to my family. So for the next 10 months, I was actually praying, Lord, I'm going to end up in a divorce if my family doesn't experience this. I want them to believe me and know I was, for heaven's sakes, I saw lights in the sky, and I tell this in total rejection. So,
now you had Chris Jr., who was one of the people who experienced this, and I'm assuming he was supporting you on this. So it was the two of you.
Yeah, and the other guys were,
and those guys
same way.
So how? So can I ask how supportive was your wife, at least initially, when you told her about this?
Well, she was supportive, but she didn't believe me. She didn't want to believe me, but she knew something happened. So automatically they revert back to
So it's just a different interpretation.
Yeah.
She thought something happened and just interpreted it as something evil, demonic.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what the church believes that, right? They've been taught basically the Christian church believes it's demonic.
Right.
The Pentagon thinks that, a lot of those guys. Well, not all of them, but it's generally believed in the Christian church that it's demonic. And so here, it didn't matter what we say. I would leave and go fishing or go wherever I went and come home to a couple of times there were preachers at my house when I would go away. They were out sprinkling holy water on the yard. And so you understand that's where I was. And so for 10 months, it was October. I was born in October. This thing happened in January. And for 10 months, I felt threatened. My wife begging me not to talk about it around the kids. It was scaring them. They were having nightmares. They were so afraid.
Right.
And here's what made it worse. This thing was appearing. It started appearing. In fact, when MUFON, I reported it in October. 10 months later, I saw Ancient Aliens on television. Stanton Freeman was on there. I thought, good golly, this guy, I'd never seen anything about UFOs. And they left the MUFON website. Call us if you have a sighting. So I Googled it, got their reporting form. I filled it out secretly, not telling anyone. And then I agonized for 2 weeks. Do I hit the send button? If I do, I may not be married. I thought that because I just felt that isolated. Long story short, I hit send, and they immediately called me back, and there were people at my house. But during that time, when the first guy came, Steve McGee, I reported it in October. Let me back up a bit.
Sure.
I reported it in October. Immediately MUFON calls, and I got afraid. So I called them back and said, I don't want to meet with you. They called me every week, the local guy, Steve McGee from Raleigh. They assigned him to the case. So he calls me every week. You got to do it. I just want to come see you.
Can I assume when you wrote your initial report, you probably gave enough of the bare bones that got their attention? 5 witnesses, maybe missing time. I don't know if you mentioned that. Sighting of a being. If any of those things were in the report, I can assume that, yes, someone at the local investigator is going to want to interview you, because that's explosive. That's right.
Exactly.
That's not a run of the mill. Oh, I saw an interesting light in the sky. Like this is major stuff happening on the ground. So it's not surprising, right, that this guy's going to be persistent.
Yeah. So he
Obviously.
calls me. He calls me all the time. And finally, he writes me just after Christmas. He says, "Chris," he said, "it's been so long. I want to give it one more chance. If you will let me come and interview you. If not, we're going to close the case."
Okay.
And this was in December.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that email and I thought about it, and I wrote him back and I said, "Steve, I'm ready to meet." And he came the first week of January.
Ah. Okay.
Almost to a year later from the day it happened, January the 7th. It was like, I think, the 3rd or so of January when Steve came. And here's the funny thing. During that whole year, while I locked myself basically in this room and just avoided everybody, my mother, my dad, I didn't even go to Christmas, and they lived next door. I was that upset that they would not believe me. So when Steve comes, I told my wife and children that this investigator is going to come. I have to talk to somebody. I can't. It's going to drive me nuts if I can't talk to somebody about what happened. I did not know what happened. I didn't know I had missing time. I didn't report that because I could not believe it. The only way I could believe it is it took the investigators there to question everybody, and for them to all team against me and make me realize that that's what happened, because I could not believe it. But the funny thing is, as soon as Steve came and he sat down, my wife came in the room with the kids and she looked at him and she said, "Do you know anything about shadow people?"
What?
And I looked at her and I'm like, prayer works. And she looked at me and pointed at me and she said, "Don't you pray for me again if you're going to be praying for that." So what was happening is her and the kids were seeing these entities walking through the house. 2 of them at one time walked down the hall, and they followed them, and they turned the curve and walked through the walls.
And no one told you this until
They would not tell me
Steve,
that.
the
It was
investigator.
happening. It was happening.
Okay.
And I had no clue until she revealed it to him. So I sat back with a great big smile, and I thought, prayer works. And so from that point on, and we went back the whole year. There were a lot of incidences that she began to talk about. This giant, what she left her mother's house with the kids in the car, all 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
They come through town, and there's this thing they described as a triangle or like an ice cream cone, standing vertical in the shape of an ice cream cone, flying right down Main Street of Hope Mills in front of them. And there, it wasn't very high, but it was just humongous. And so it really brought them into knowing.
So
that
this had happened, and am I right in thinking they did not tell you when that happened?
They didn't tell me.
That was earlier in the year. Wow.
The kids told me a couple of times that they had seen lights, but they kept it from me until MUFON came.
Interesting. Wow.
Right. And so
I'd be a little bit annoyed and a little bit feeling vindicated. That's probably how you felt. It's like, why did you tell me this before? I would have definitely wanted that. Yeah.
But that was for the family. But the rest of the community, a lot of them still think that guy's out there, right? They don't want to hear this kind of stuff. But the next step was immediately. Steve McGee writes this. I have a meeting with him. Yvonne tells him about her experiences. The kids chime in, and we're all sitting there telling this guy, and he's writing this big report. He sends it to California. Well, it wasn't, but one day I get a call from some guy named Jim DeMonchi from California. He's a police officer. He tells me about his sightings and so on, and he refers me to, he said, "I want you to meet the director of MUFON," which was James Carrion. And
right.
Next thing I get a call from that guy. And he's like, your case is too big um, for Steve to handle. I'd like to send some other people out there. Next thing I know, here comes others. And before it was over with, there was a half a dozen people. Every week almost, there were people coming to my house, and they came from everywhere. They were from Maryland to California to in between.
Mm-hmm.
And within 6 months, by June, they had talked me into a Discovery Channel show. And I thought, boy, this is just going to vindicate me to the community. This is what I'm thinking.
Right.
And that's why I agreed to do it. My wife and kids too. They knew it was real. They just didn't know, and everybody still wonders what we're dealing with, right? But so I agreed.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought their crew out, and then by June they had their whole Discovery Channel thing done. And
so what are we in, like 2000? Is this 2008, 2008, 2009?
Yes. Yeah,
2008. Okay.
So I reported it in October. I would not meet them until January,
right.
And by June they had already, or July, they had already finished their documentary.
Now, it wasn't MUFON that organized the whole Discovery Channel thing, or was it? Was that a MUFON?
It was MUFON.
Oh,
it was James
wow.
Carey on it.
Okay.
He organized the whole thing, and he brought them in there. And
now this MUFON investigation kind of went bad for you. I mean, can you talk a little bit about this? I know you're not the kind of guy who wants to trash talk anyone. I'm not asking you to, but I think it's important to understand that what started out as a very supportive investigation did not end up like that. It seems that MUFON, or maybe even James himself, James Carrion, took an antagonistic position toward your case. Can we talk a little bit about that, please? Do you mind?
Yeah, I can.
Look, I'm not here to trash talk him either. I've met him, and I have nothing personal against any of these people in MUFON, and that includes him. But this seems to be part of the story.
Well, I can tell you, and there's a lot of people that know this, and I have to be careful here, but they nearly destroyed my life. And I say they. I basically put it on that guy, the director that came to my house. I don't hold anything against MUFON. I think they're wonderful people. There's a lot of people there that are
You
friends.
say the director, I assume you mean James.
But he was in charge. He came to my house. In fact, I was their first case, and he had just been appointed to MUFON. I mean, he took John Schuessler's place, and somehow they don't even know how he got there. But I do now. I know from the backstory. They took the state director in North Carolina, Lund, I think his name was Lund, Lund.
Mm-hmm.
He was coming to meet me. He was dying. He was Steve McGee's director, right?
Yes,
North Carolina State
right.
Director. James Carrion called and made him step down and brought a guy from Virginia and put him in his place.
And who was this person?
This is Richard Lang, and he said Richard's better suited to handle this case, and so I want him to do it. Well, he pulled Steve McGee off the case, which I felt very comfortable with. So everybody that I started with, my local guy that I've become friends with, and I'm really sheepish about talking about this, especially then. Right now, I've got strangers from everywhere, and they made me so angry because they treated me like I was a criminal, questioning and pounding on the desk. And I just told them, don't come back to my house if you're not going to treat me with respect. I'm not lying to you. And here's the thing, Richard. This is what really bit put the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
They came in, did this video, this UFO show UFOs over Earth, and there was so much evidence that would have proved this thing without any doubt. There was burned circles in my grass. There was evidence from the soil and from the tree and from eyewitnesses, and there were many eyewitnesses. And they didn't care about any of that. All they thought about this guy carrying was to get me on a lie detector so he could set the stage to put doubt in the whole show. He's a disinformation agent, this guy. Worked for the government, some sort of intelligence officer. And I don't mind saying it. He personally he did a hack job on our case. That's what he did.
You feel he
And
was trying to debunk your case?
I know he
Yeah,
was.
okay.
And that was told to me by somebody from Washington. And I'm not going to say who or how, but he called me and he said, he told my whole family, he said, we felt sorry for you because they did a hack job on you.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is all through 2008 going into 2009, or just right around that period? 2008 only. Okay.
I never saw him again. From that point, here I am now. They came, they got their show, and they made me out to be a liar. They used this lie detector test, and here's the crazy thing. I get a call from California, from the Discovery Channel. We're flying into Fayetteville tonight. We'll be in Fayetteville at 10:30. Do you know where we can get a hotel room? And I recommended a couple. He said, great. And he got to Fayetteville. He calls me from the hotel, and he says, we'll be at your house at 8:30 in the morning with a crew. So I get up, I get dressed. My kids are so excited because Hollywood's coming. You know, we've never seen it.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
It was the most exciting thing in the world. So here's my little children. They're all dressed in their house. They clean and all ready. And 8:30 comes. I get a call and says, I'm sorry, can you come by the hotel a minute? We'd like to go over some paperwork, and there's other groups that are here that might need to take half the guys to one location, and blah, blah, blah. When I walked in the door, my wife and I went to the hotel, left our kids at home, walked in the lobby, nobody there. Sat down, she and I, and this guy walks by. She said, you think he's from Hollywood? I mean, we didn't have no clue, right? Nobody was there to greet us. Here comes a guy out of the door. He walks up and he says, hi, I'm Bob. You must be Chris. I said, yeah, that's me. He walks down the hall, follow me to a conference room, opens the door, and there's like 5 people with cameras pointing at a chair, and a guy standing there with a lie detector machine waiting on me when I walked in that freaking hotel.
They sprung a polygraph test on you without warning.
Absolutely. And they told me that morning that they had to do it first because of Mr. Herdak or Dudak, whatever his name is, from the FBI. They brought the Federal Bureau of Investigation lie detector guy to do this test.
Now, this was brought in, was this a MUFON orchestrated thing or some other organization?
Yes. No, it's MUFON. It was all James Carry-On. And they did that. They never filmed anything. They never talked. We never did anything. They did that first. They built the whole show around it. They left out all the evidence, all the burned grass, all the witnesses. When they got their show, they disappeared and would not call me back. I've got kids that are suffering, and one about ready to leave from home because he was scared to death, and lights in the sky, and here my children now go to school.
Mm-hmm.
My 9-year-old comes home crying because the teacher sees the YouTube or the Discovery Channel show, and they take her up in front of the class and make fun of her and her father. And this went on for a long time. And I called them. I called Carry-On when he sent the draft, and I was very mad. I said, "You lied to me. You told me this thing was going to go one way, and here." He said, "It's just too late to air," and I had no choice. But Discovery told me they had 100% choice on how they could do the show. So it was a hack job, and I know it.
We're going to go to a break in just about 30 seconds, and then we'll come right back, Chris. But
okay.
It's very disturbing to hear this. When we come back, I want to get into if there's any other details about this polygraph, because it's one of those things that skeptics like to use against you. The way they used it against Travis Walton back in 1975, he had his own terrible experience with the polygraph. I studied that in a lot of detail. We can maybe come back to that. Right now, let me just take a quick break. I'm Richard Dolan here with Chris Bledsoe, and this is the Richard Dolan Show on KGRA Radio. We will be right back. We're back. I'm Richard Dolan here with Chris Bledsoe. Chris, we were just talking about this whole fiasco with the polygraph test. It was, I didn't know this, it was sprung on you without warning. You had no idea that this was happening. Everyone knows polygraphs, I mean, are widely used in government. People with security clearances do take them. I'm sure that there are valid uses of polygraphs. I don't think anyone would deny that. But I don't think anyone's also claiming that they're infallible. And you can get false positives, particularly if you're highly nervous, which I think you probably were caught off guard. What actually were the results of the polygraph test? What were the biggest problems that they cited as, showing dishonesty on the polygraph?
Well, according to Mr. Durdak, and we were all there, we heard him say this thing. There were 34 questions. They asked me these 34 questions over and over and over for at least so long. I was exhausted. And I told him, I'm tired of telling you the same questions over and over. 34 questions. And according to him, I failed one question. And that was an entity, seeing an entity. That was it. One question out of 34. And
the question was,
did
you see an entity?
Give over three or four questions.
I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. What was the question? Something about seeing an entity?
An entity. Did I see an entity? When I ran up to the tree and I turned around, was there an entity there? And I said yes. And that was one out of 34 questions he said that I missed. But I know it was all a setup.
So he said that the test, that he concluded you did not answer that question truthfully.
That one question. It was in his opinion I was not truthful on that one question. That was it. One out of 34.
Wow.
And I've since learned that they're not supposed to ask you over like 6 or 8 questions, much less 34.
I've heard that same thing. In fact, I was surprised. I was talking with someone who had a lot of experience about polygraphs, and they said, yeah, it's a couple of questions. They only ask like a small handful, like less than 5.
I got 34. 34, and they asked him 3 or 4 times. Took an hour, and I'm like, I'm ready to leave. I'm not doing this anymore.
It's one of these cases where, you can see this over and over again. Hardcore skeptics, committed ideological skeptics, and there's so many of them out there. They use things like that they latch onto it, and this becomes their reason for dismissing you now. Oh, he failed the poly. This type of thing, when the reality is much more nuanced. And also, I mean, really, they are misrepresenting the results, is what it seems like. So I'm glad I got to ask you about that.
I'm glad you did, and I can honestly say that skeptics, in my book, I've dealt with them so long, they're just uninformed. They either have an agenda to... they have an agenda to debunk this stuff, and they're doing it for someone, or they're just uninformed and have no mental brain capacity to understand this. And a good friend of mine from NASA told me, he said, Chris, he said, not everybody has the mental capacity to understand this. They either they'll never get it. They will never get it, so they'll be skeptical the rest of their life. And that's okay. But those same skeptics are welcome to come here, and I can show them. And we have a lot of friends that have witnessed this, high-level friends, and they will be glad. In fact, let John Alexander tell them his experience. So
Yeah,
That negates all the skepticism.
I want to move on. But that whole thing about mental capacity, I just remember when my daughter was a teenager, she would have said, "Burn."
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
so
just laugh at skeptics because I
oh
have
my
to too.
God,
You
yeah.
know?
So that was the whole fiasco with MUFON. For the record, I think I mentioned in our previous interview, I did speak. Actually, I communicated with Jan Harzan before we did our interview, and he just said that MUFON's conclusion is that your case is an official unknown with them, and that this is his words, but that they considered you to be reputable, credible, and they did not have a conventional explanation for your case. So they give you good marks now for whatever else happened to you over a decade ago. It's worth knowing.
Well, I want to say this. I've never met Jan. In fact, Jan wasn't there when it all happened. It was Carry On, and he didn't stay there very long. I think he did my case, and within 6 or 8 months, he lost his job. I don't know for whatever reason, but there was a dispute there. But I have no hard feelings towards MUFON. I have no hard feelings towards Jan Hartson or anyone.
Mm-hmm.
It was the people that came in and caused my children to come home crying. I was ready to. If he was a neighbor, I would have been over there and confronted him. I can tell you that. It was wrong what they did. They could have done it differently.
Yeah.
So
it's true. When your family is affected, that's the thing that'll get anyone really angry. So moving on from there, though, you had other people begin to visit you. Now, was this before or after your experience in 2012 when you encountered this apparition of what has been called the lady that was on Easter? But I'd like to get to that in a separate interview, if you don't mind.
Exactly.
Are there other important things going on during this period of time leading up to 2012 that listeners might want to hear about?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that went on. There were what I call 5 years of, and let me go back. I want to say one thing about this polygraph thing.
Sure.
When I reported this to MUFON, I offered to do a polygraph, and because I'm being 100% honest, and to this day I would probably I will not go down that path again, because the man running it can make you truthful or liar. It's up to him. I can tell you. But I did offer to do it, but not that morning, and it was going to be later in the deal. They lied to me and said, we'll be at your house at 8:30. And they're like, oh, we need to do this first. They just sprung it on me, and I wasn't ready. And the way it was done was negative, and it threw a dark cloud with me over the whole thing to begin with. And so that said, let's move on to, I have so much. Example, my father. Here's a story.
Sure, let's hear about this.
My father had, he was put in the hospital because his gallbladder ruptured.
Now, are we back in the 2008-2009 period, or are we somewhere else?
We're before the lady.
Okay,
This is in those 5 years.
Got it.
There's so many things that happened in those 5 years of people experiencing things with me, me working with people from the aerospace industry. In fact, they were on scene, certain ones. The very week MUFON left and says, see ya, then the scientists started coming. And that's kind of one reason I didn't ever go public from then till now, because I've worked and met a lot of people that are very confidential and private and serious people, and so I spent a lot of time there. But one story is my father. He and mother. He was diagnosed with kidney cancer, and they told him that he was not going to live, that it would just get worse and become very painful and so on. So he was my best friend, and I could not. We lived next door. All I could do was go out and look at the sky and pray and ask for them to help him. That's all I could think of. Well, he ends up at Duke University, and they give him this diagnosis that he's not going to live. He's not going to make it. He's going to end up badly.
Right.
So he comes. He's in the worst shape. We're all long faced, and it's a Friday, and we all run over. My wife, my children, and I. Dad's sitting out on the back porch with Mother when we get home. And it's a Friday, and we were waiting on an important call, because what happened is the guys at Duke told my father, because his heart was so weak, he had a heart attack, had only like 60% of his heart worked. They could not put him to sleep. He would not wake up. So they couldn't do the surgery on his cancer, on the kidney. Right? So it was a terrible thing.
Right.
They said you should go to Chapel Hill and get a second opinion. This is when I was really crying out for help. We get there on Friday afternoon, and we're waiting to hear this results, what Chapel Hill said. And we're all outside, the whole family, Mother, Dad, me, my wife, children. And the phone rings, and the doctor from Chapel Hill said, "We don't see this cancer. It's not a problem. There's nothing there. You're not going to die from this." I mean, it was just a total opposite. And immediately I took and threw my hands up, and I looked up to the sky, and I said, "Thank you, Lord." And when I did, this cylindrical object appeared right over top of us. My dad crawled up out of that. He was laying in a swing, a covered swing. He got up, my mother, my children, we all saw it appear above us, and then just went flying away. And that's just some of the
cylindrical,
glowing cigar about. It was huge, and it appeared above us and flew away. And he died from a heart attack years later, but he never had another problem with this cancer. And we all saw it. My mother saw it, my dad saw it, my children, and that's not the first time.
Wow.
So there are a lot of things that have happened in those 5 years, and I would never talk anymore. I'd had enough of the publicity and all the damage that the UFOs over Earth thing had a lot of damage to my children, and it was just an awful thing. But blessings were happening, Richard. Yeah. Blessings.
Now, wow, that's interesting indeed, Chris. We've got almost 20 minutes where we can talk about some of these other things, and I'm trying to avoid the events of 2012 and onward, because I know they're really intense. There's a lot that we'll want to cover there. Are there any other interactions that you had? Were there other UFO sightings during this period, or encounters with beings? There's a drawing that I think you made it was very remarkable. It was very similar to the famous 2002 crop circle that had a picture of an alien being. I don't know much about this, but this was called The Guardian. This is by, I guess it was one of your drawings.
Right.
Can you talk about that? Because I think that's from that period of time as well.
There was a young boy named Derek Ingram. He's an artist, and he lives in California. He's a very good artist. He was basically homeless, and he lived with his grandmother. She was very sick, and he walked to school every day. He walked 5-6 miles to school in the rain, and my wife got to see him, picked him up, started carrying him to school, and found out he was a really good artist. And so one afternoon he was sitting there, and I said, "You want to attempt to draw this thing?" And by memory, he made the drawing. He made it by pencil sketch, and it's posted somewhere. He still has the original copy, and I did the painting based off of his sketch. In my thoughts and memory, all I could remember during those days, it was his drawing. I did a painting based on his drawing. But if I had to say 100%, it was what I experienced. I couldn't tell you if it was exactly what I saw.
Is this the
As far
same
as
being
incidents.
that is this the same being that you encountered the night of the river incident, or is this something
No,
different?
no, this was a little tiny guy. On board the craft, after my regression, this is how this come about. After the regression, with Dr. O'Connell. MUFON brought this guy from Harvard, Dr. O'Connell. He was a Harvard trained, worked under John Mack, and he did the regression, and I began to remember things.
Okay, so
And a
let's
lot of,
explore this then, because I think this is kind of interesting here, right? So
right.
this is the regression because you had several hours of what appeared to be missing time. In fact, what
Yeah,
certainly missing time from that incident in 2007. So
right.
yeah, so what happened during this regression?
Well, for the first year, I had no clue I had missing time, and every time I tried to think about it, I had the worst headache. This is very important. There was some kind of block there that gave me a severe headache. If I tried to remember any of it, uh, period, I could
Right.
not. My wife would tell you, and people saw it. It was so bad a headache that I would literally pass out. Pass out. I mean, literally from I don't know why, but she's described it many times. I would be trying to remember and then just pass out. And I can't say why. And the worst headache. And Dr. O'Connell, he came, he visited for 2 or 3 days before we ever did a regression. And he was very gentle and we talked and um, he performed some sort of regression, but it wasn't a regression as far as memory. It was some sort of regression to remove this headache that I had. And honestly, immediately it went away. Immediately I
Huh.
could start thinking
Huh.
then without the headache.
Okay.
And then we did the regression on tape while MUFON was there.
I see.
They recorded it. And this is the funny thing. Out of a whole hour and a half, 2 hour regression on the television, they decided to put something that would be funny, like where I said they were their children. They let them out to play, and that got a great big laugh, and they thought it would, I guess, integrate the whole thing. But what
Right.
they didn't realize was when I reported that this little guy with a triangle on his chest
Yes.
that was glowing, and that they were their children, and they let them out to play. Next thing I know, I get a knock on my door, and this guy from Florida, he comes and surprises me and says, "Can we talk about those little children with a triangle on the chest?" And I said, "Absolutely." And from that point forward, life changed, and my connection to some very serious people started.
Now I
And
know there's limits to how far you want to go here, right?
right,
So we're going to
I'm
respect that.
being very limited there.
But by
And
Florida, are we talking people who are? Are you able to say
uh,
anything more about that or not?
well, all I can say is Dr. Pasolka is my study partner, and she published a book, American
It's
Cosmic, and
Diana
she talks
Pasolka.
about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, she talks about that, and I would leave that for her to tell the story there. I'm too afraid I might say something that would
It's fair
not be
enough. Fair enough.
kosher. So,
I
but
guess we can say
that
though that
was
you have had some very well-connected people who've been interested in your case. Like you can say that.
I can say that they still are,
Yeah.
and that it goes all the way to Washington.
Right. So you have
Uh,
government people in the intelligence field, people in government, scientists, well-connected scientists.
yes,
All of these people are very interested in your case.
I would be upset if my government wasn't interested in this stuff because it's real. And a lot of people know it. And I think they've known it. It's become public since the AATIP threat program.
Yeah.
I happened to be in their first case, if you remember. So
Okay.
you
So you're
kind of got
able.
a
You want to talk
lot of
about that?
attention.
So you just said it. So you just said it. So yeah, I think let me just restate this. I mean, because this is kind of important. So the ATIP program, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. Hey, this is what the New York Times put it out there. This is what all the folks in TTSA basically piggybacked on top of that. This was a Pentagon program from 2007. And actually, it's the successor programs are still going, but the official version, supposedly, according to the Pentagon, went till 2012. But you just said your case was ATIP's first investigation, and indeed, your case was in January 2007.
Yeah.
Now, is that all you want to say about it? If that's all, I'm not. I don't want to put you in a place where you don't want to go. But
Well, and I appreciate that, Richard. And I do have to be careful, but I can say that um, a lot of people know this case. A lot of people, and I disappeared into the darkness, and there's a reason why. And it's
are we ever going to
because
know the full story as to why? I mean, we're teasing people here a little bit. That's fine. Nothing wrong with a little
yeah,
teasing. But will we be able to follow through at some point with the full story here?
I can't honestly say, but I can say Dr. Pasolka's book outlines, kind of hits into that. It talks about some of the things that people did with me, but
Right.
it more talks about some of the people I introduced her to. And that's a big thing.
Now,
Huge.
should we leave it at that? We were. I was going to
Yes.
try to explore this in our next episode, but that's fine. We can get
Yeah.
into it here. That's fine. By the way, yeah, she's very interesting, and I hope to chat with her myself sometime. I think she's a
Um,
very interesting
maybe,
person.
maybe you should come here and we'll drive down and meet her.
Well,
She's just down the road, and
good.
I love her. She was there when nobody else was there,
Yeah.
and we study this together. And
Hmm.
she's a smart girl, is all I
Yeah.
can say. Very smart.
In about the 8 to 10 minutes we have left, sir.
Okay.
What else? I mean, what else is helpful for people? So, was there anything else about that hypnosis, by the way, the regression? How much of that came out of? Were you taken onto the ship, onto a ship? Were you? Did you encounter other beings, or do you have any of those types of memories? That's the classic things that people remember during an abduction. Did you remember any of those
Yes.
things?
Yes. This is where the painting, the guardian
Yeah.
painting came from, because the during the regression, the um, the memories came back of me being taken.
Okay. What
And
specifically can you relate or recall here for us?
what I can tell you is why I told them they were their children, that they let them out to play,
Hmm.
because whatever was in the egg was a lot taller. They were very tall. They were probably 7, 8 feet tall, and there were three of them in there.
How would you
And
describe their appearance other than their height? What did they look like? What were their faces like?
they were very hard to see. It's like I was when I found myself on this craft. In this, I was in a room and it was dark, and I was afraid. I was frightened to death. And I was standing there, and all of a sudden, the light comes on over my head, straight down on my body, and there was a circle around me. I could stick my hand in the darkness, and I couldn't see it. My arm would disappear. So there was a spotlight above me. And as the light began to move back, I began to see these three entities staring at me. and that's where that painting come from. They looked like they were very tall, and they just were staring, like these eyes were looking at me, and I could never get that out of my thoughts. And to say that painting that Derek did was exact, I couldn't say that for sure, but it looked a lot like what my memories were of being on board that craft. And it was them in that regression that I understood that the beings that were holding Christopher down, and the one that was the one that I saw in my property was whatever they called their children. They let them out to play. That's how all that came about. So, and I remember those, and I remember that being on that being missing time for 4 hours seemed like 4 years. It didn't seem like 4 hours. It seems like forever, because I have so many memories that are they memories? Were they put in my head or what? I don't know, but there's so much that I've written down that I discuss with others from being above the pyramids in Egypt, looking down over the pyramids and looking at the rear of the Sphinx.
Wait, now is this from a memory from a regression as well, or
from missing time? All that came. A lot of stuff came. They were messages.
Okay.
Things I saw, things that frightened me so bad that I literally began prepping in a huge way. I thought the world was coming to an end, because a lot of that's what I experienced in that missing time.
In about 2 or 3 minutes we have left here, aside from what your opinions were at the time, what do you now believe these beings are up to here? I know there's more of your story we want to cover, but I'm just asking, what do you, because I think you feel that they're benevolent. That's the impression that I get from you. What do you feel their mission is? Why do you think that they are here based on your interactions with them? Or what do you think they're about overall?
I think they created everything, or they tend to it, that they manage this planet and all of us, that is totally, that we're really in an illusion, if I had to say. Mm-hmm. I think that they're protectors of this world.
Wow.
But that's my theory.
Wow.
The ones that I interact with, because it happens all the time. And you've seen some of the videos. A lot of people, there's a lot of things that happen with people getting blessings. I just can't, I don't know how I could share this without having people to tell these stories. And I don't like to use names because it wouldn't be right. But there's so many people that have had trauma that received blessings from this, sickness and so on. So when you couple that with me being healed from Crohn's, I had Crohn's for 17 years and was treated, and they're still treating me for it. My doctor still treats me with a medication, thinking that maybe the rheumatoid came, when the Crohn's went away, rheumatoid came from that. It came back as that. In fact, a friend from Duke told me he thought that, a doctor there. And so I went, and I was tested at Chapel Hill, and they said, absolutely not. This is entirely new disease. But my doctor in Fayetteville still treats me for it.
It's remarkable. What you've got here with your case, it's what I would feel, I call it like a messy, it's messy in the sense that my instinct is I want UFO cases to be nice and neat and mechanical. Like I don't want them to be spiritual and deep and meaningful. I really don't. Like I want them to be something that I can understand. I'm just being honest with you. Right. So when, you're not the first person to have a deeply spiritual type of encounter with these beings or with this phenomenon. And, I laugh at myself when I say the things that I do. I want it to be simple and materialistic because I know that they're not. Like I've learned as well over the years, this phenomenon doesn't fit into a neat little category. I want it
Right.
to. Like I want it because then I feel like I could put it into a nice little box. I can make sure that I understand it. I can label it. I can identify it, and so on. And it just never behaves. It
Exactly.
doesn't do that for me. And your case, is a classic one that it challenges me, and I'm sure it challenges many other people to look at what we call this UFO phenomenon, or these UAP, or whatever we're dealing with, and ask ourselves, just how deep is this intelligence? How far does this go? What does this say about the nature of our reality? What does this say about space and time? What does this say about our own causality in our own world? Are they more than the guardians? Are they managing our world? I mean, we could, this, your case, and again, this isn't the only kind of case. It just opens up all of these philosophical questions, and that leads
I
us
don't
down
think
a
there's
rabbit
no
hole.
way it can be as easy as an alien. That's just too simple.
Well,
It
yeah,
doesn't work that way. It knows what you think,
I think it was
and
Jacques. Yeah, go on.
I think if everybody would watch the movie, The Adjustment Bureau, it was told to me to watch that by some pretty important people, and they said they believe it's a lot like that. So
Yeah, that was a great movie, and that was a Matt Damon film. And in that, you've got these people; they're outside our space-time reality, and they just move things around, like they adjust reality for the purposes of whatever destiny has in store for people, right? So, like, they can
exactly.
stop time, move things. Yeah, it's a cool movie.
Yeah.
Well, look, this is all we have the time for this session, Chris. But we're not done. But for this segment, I really want to thank you for appearing once again, and giving your time for this.
I appreciate it, Rich. I just wish I could talk more about things that would really people would want to hear, but I just can't.
Yeah, well,
I
me
have to
too.
be
Me too. I wish you could,
right.
but look, you go as far as you can go, and we understand. For now,
That's
we're going to come back. We're
right.
going to try to push you a little further next time. But
Right.
for right now, that's all we've got. I want to thank you, Chris. I want to thank listeners for being here with us. I'm Richard Dolan. This is the Richard Dolan Show on KGRA Radio. Catch you next time.